Hello, Cardstack community. My name is Chrissy. I'm the founding director of the Cardstack project, coming to you from the land of the Web3. Today, we're going to talk about identity and reputation in Web3. And we are glad to be joined by Quadrata CEO Fabrice Cheng to talk about his unique approach with his team of tackling this idea of how you can have a passport that brings you to different experiences, starting with DeFi in Web3. Welcome, Fabrice.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. Happy to talk about identity, Web3, and all things blockchain in general.
Exactly. So what's really interesting about identity is that Web3 introduces this idea of a wallet and address, and that creates a pseudo-anonymous kind of a construct that started with Bitcoin, which is that every single time in Bitcoin, for example, you send a transaction, you're a different address. Not to say you're a different person, doesn't mean that you can't put it together, but there's an implied idea that this is not a person, this is just some transaction. And as we kind of explore different type of use cases, that primitives is now being added on, especially within the ecosystem beyond Bitcoin. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of your journey in crypto and now in Web3 and how you kind of came to identify this opportunity to work on this passport idea and what is the current offering for Quadrata? More importantly, where do you see the missing piece within the ecosystem?
Absolutely. So my journey as crypto didn't start like most people with investment, but more specifically being intrigued by the technology. I'm one of the first builders on top of Ethereum technology. And I think what really attracted me to this space is, as you said, this notion of a wallet address. And I think for the first time, specifically when you look at Ethereum, a wallet address is used to transact not only with transfer of money, but used to buy NFT, used to potentially buy e-commerce shop, a shop on e-commerce, used to buy swap and lend. And this is kind of the first time ultimately that you have this universal sign-on, single sign-on that replaces your login password. So that was something that was ultimately very interesting to me. And where my previous company, Spring Labs, is a company that facilitates exchange of consumer informations, and the way we do it ultimately is also leveraging advanced technology to enhance privacy, to make sure that the parties don't see more than they're supposed to see, so we can maintain some pseudonymity of the data being exchanged. And I guess when you combine technology on how to enable that, and you combine the need and the purpose of having access to some information beyond just a wallet, and you combine my expertise with blockchain, I really combine those three and felt like the space, the way it is today, has reached a level where it can innovate more, but it's really bottlenecked and has a ceiling because it doesn't have access to information beyond the wallet addresses. So the reasoning was, how can we bring safely, again, always the notion of safely and notion of making sure that this data privacy and the pseudonymity is being preserved, but at the same time still have access to some level of information beyond just the wallet addresses. And the reason why it's interesting to attach that to the wallet is, again, the base foundation of it, it's already this universal single sign-on that everyone had agreed on as a standard. Everyone has this little connect wallet on the top right of your website. So it has become a standard before we know it.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at this as like, the single sign-on that people discuss about in the Web2 world, like with Facebook login and Google login, that has some success in the IoT or different type of basis. But as far as being able to show the power of multiple applications working together, using the Wallet Connect or Connect Wallet or MetaMask is the first time I think people, a small number of people in the universe of digital users really experience single sign-on in a way that doesn't suck. If you're doing enterprise single sign-on, that's even worse than the Google login world. It's interesting that is actually the first really a smooth integration, maybe not at the same numbers. But one thing you mentioned that was talking a little bit that was interesting, I want to kind of drill down into it, is that obviously one way to know what the wallet address and who is behind them is do what a centralized exchange with and ask for passport photos, selfie, see pictures where you hold up a passport and smile and submit your tax returns and stuff like that. And obviously, that's quite invasive, and it provides a great risk of losing that data if the exchange go belly up or something, which they do. Can you tell us a little bit about the actual risk of data privacy violation in the kind of the centralized exchange approach, and how your approach of using this on-chain hash and association and these kind of metadata attribute, how does that differ from submitting a bunch of documents via email?
Right. So I think there's two aspects to that question. The first one is, how do we basically ultimately provide verification of identity? And that, I think today, at least in our paradigm, it is inherently requiring some sort of centralized source that is performing those verifications. So I think that's something that we are not doing any differently. And the reason is because, I think, there might be a future where you don't have to rely on centralized entity, and you can say, as long as my friend says that I'm a good person, you can rely on that. Right. I don't think we have reached that level of self-sovereign identity and mechanism. Hopefully in the future, something towards this. But in the short term, I think they still need that reliance on, what we call, for instance, if we think about KYC, we think about document KYC. There still need to be a centralized company that collects, verify, and ensure that you are who you are. I think the key difference is in the second topic, which is the problem with today's system is not necessarily that you have to provide document, is that you have to provide documents to every single business that you want to work with.
Right.
If I Coinbase, I have to provide this document. For the Binance, same thing. And once you leave the applications, you kind of lose everything here. And that's just as it relates to identity. But if you think about reputation, it can even sometimes you look at, you're on Amazon, you are a seller and you have a bunch of reviews. If you leave Amazon, you go on eBay, you also start from scratch. You have to create a new identity and reputation. So I think this is where Quadrata is trying to redefine how identity is represented. It shouldn't be represented at the application layer or the product or the business that you want to use. It should be with you. You are supposed to have your universal identity that contains verifiable proof that you've been KYC'd. They can contain reputational data, and application can start querying those informations. So instead of providing that documentation to 1,000 companies, you're providing to only the entity that is in charge of verifying your information. And we store in the passport, the token passport, just verification that it has been done. So now it contains, it's less user friction for the user. It reduced drastically the data risk of being compromised, right? And at the same time, the user can decide to share a certain amount of information or not to specific applications. Some applications, they don't need to know exactly who's your first name, your last name, where you live. They might just need to know that you're not a criminal. And that's all they need. As soon as they see this check, they say, you're good. And I think this is a perfect design when you think about the wallet address, because you can now attach that to the wallet address that is yours and yours only, and at the same time, this single sign-on that you go to multiple applications with.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that some application depends on DApp, especially have to respond to certain type of jurisdictional requirements that you cannot serve people in this country, or you have to make sure that the sanction list is being reviewed. There are many companies providing fairly sophisticated integrations as necessary. Do you see a protocol level solution being competitive to a type of widget that you install on your website to do geofencing or do type of kind of other blocking? Or do you think it's complementary? Like if the developer goal is to serve the greatest number of users who is going to benefit from the protocol without compromising any jurisdictional alignment, if that's the goal, what solution should they go with? Should they go with a kind of cloud-hosted, data analytic-driven, kind of Chainalytics, TRM Labs type of solution versus one that relies on kind of another centralized entity doing the validation, but the ability for that to be kind of reviewed in a more automated way?
Yeah,
What's
I think that's kind of
thought on that?
That's really what Quadrata is about, right? Like technically, Quadrata has this geographical attributes, the country of the government issue ID. So any passport holders that come to us will contain proof of where the country of the government issued IDs in the token itself. So as a protocol now, you can screen for that passport. And again, you don't need to know who they are. Just to say this, what our address is, what is the country, or it's US, or I might not want to deal with the US for those specific reasons. To the second question about, is that enough, or do we need to still add this geofencing and things like that? I think that is obviously up to the companies in general. The interesting part about compliance, from my understanding, is that it's not something that is black and white. It's basically best effort. And in general, I would say probably from the company perspective, you are trying to do the least amount of effort, but that is still compliant. And from probably like a law enforcement type of companies, you're trying to make as many effort as much as possible. So it's always to find that right balance here. Ultimately, Quadrata is trying to add an additional way for you to screen for that. So it is complementary for some, enough for some others, and not enough for probably like the third categories.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think if you're in a kind of more centralized kind of services, the regulations are higher. And if you're in a decentralized app, the regulation or the compliance level can be adjusted based on how much of it is a intermediary. That makes a ton of sense. In terms of the review of the information that the user provided, obviously you mentioned earlier that you're not eliminating the need for a party, possibly a human, possibly assisted by machines and algorithm, to make a determination to essentially solidify or publish or verify a certain amount of attributes that can be reused later on. How does that process look like? And who are these people that are sitting in front? I know that we are a Swiss foundation, and we in a Swiss ecosystem, there are AML compliant experts who can be hired on a per hour basis to do bank level verification of identity documents, and those are really important certain type of transaction, especially in participating on some sort of regulated financial transactions on the other side of it. So what do you see as the kind of a human on-ramp for this type of issuance of the attributes?
Right. So I think the important things to highlight first is the kind of delineation between Quadrata, which is a technology layer, and the data providers, partners that we work with, who are the centralized entities that have the business know-how on how to perform KYC, AML, and any sort of attributes that we make available in passports. Our role as Quadrata, we never see the data, so we don't have any way to verify the accuracy of the data. What we do is that we are in charge of basically standardizing how the information is being represented. And we're also in charge of mentioning what is the minimum requirement of what it means if a KYC attributes is being attested, or AML attributes. So we standardize how it's been represented and the minimum level of procedures that this entitles. To that end, we're able to allow and onboard eligible vendors that meets those criteria. And those processes ultimately are visible. And if you own a Quadrata passport, that means that you have at least gone through those steps. Again, because compliance is, worldwide, it differs jurisdiction from jurisdictions, and business have different requirements.
Yeah, very much so.
Quadrata technology will not be able to cover 100% of the use cases. The important is that we are publicly disclosing what this means, what enters into the KYC processes, the KYB processes, and AML, and the companies kind of make a judgment call if this is good for them or not good enough for them. And there are manual verifications from our vendors. I can't necessarily speak to all of them because that's not ultimately our core competencies, but there's like it's really typical type of KYC AML that you find in Web2. I don't think they reinvent the way of how it's been performed. It's really the innovation here is the fact that it's been done once. It's been standardized in a way that is removing the PII from it. It's been signed to ensure that it is coming from that data vendors and nobody else can tamper with that information. And it's done once, and hopefully multiple times by different applications.
That makes a lot of sense. When people are using crypto, obviously one person and one business may have multiple wallets that is actively in use for segregation of funds, purposes, risk level. Obviously, more and more people are doing multi-sig. So they would have like things like NosaSafe or Bitcoin multisig built in. How do you deal with the mapping between the actual wallet address universe that exists and the businesses and consumer, the KYC, KYB aspects of the identity? How does that get resolved in terms of, do we want to kind of like aggregate? In some cases, some of these data analytic providers want to provide, hey, these are all the wallets owned by this famous crypto investor. Pay attention. And sometimes that is proprietary and valuable information for trading advantages. How do you deal with, and how do you expect that information to be used for this type of like householding or like aggregation of multiple wallets per entity?
Yeah, excellent question. This is actually one of the key features as well of our technology. We basically are able to link multiple wallets through opt-in, meaning that as a consumer who wants to leverage multiple wallets, and many people do, and they agree again on user consent to onboard with their Quadrata password, every single one of their wallets, they'll basically be tied to the same Quadrata DID, that stands for decentralized identifier. That is, in our perspective, in our technology, a Sybil-resistant identity, meaning that all the wallets that belong to the same individuals have the same DID. That's how you link them together. And so you can use that DID to ensure that a user is unique, and even they use multiple wallets, you can detect that. You use the DID as well for a global AML score. You want to make sure that if they get flagged for a sanction list from the wallet, all the wallets that are attached to that DID is also being flagged respectively. So same thing with reputations. Reputation is something that in general we want to make sure that it cannot be gamed, so it cannot be split per wallet. So we do the same concept here. I think that's something that is a core to the technology of Quadrata, and so that's kind of the how we ultimately deal with multiple identities. I think we are not necessarily thinking from the perspective of being able to detect wallets that are not onboarded. So we're not in the job of chain analysis to try to say, oh, those wallets that are likelihood of being the same, because we rely on more like trusted proof. You have to undergo through KYC to ensure that this is indeed the same person.
Yeah, so it's the opt-in is to say that if I were operating 3 or 4 wallets, and I want people to kind of get the benefit of the reputation, or to know that that is us or me acting, then I opt into this aggregation, and then obviously I have the risk that if one of those wallets gets flagged, then all of my wallet get flagged. But you also get the benefits of having the aggregation of power and reputation and momentum and heft, for lack of a better word, that comes with the fact that I'm not just a bit player, I'm actually all of these players. Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I think this opt-in versus kind of like, being outed in some cases if chain analysis decide to go after you.
I think it's a little bit more than opt-in, because I think you can think of it as also from a DApp perspective. If they actually want to ensure they're unique, they can force every user to have a passport. So if let's say you have a concert ticket system and you say, I only want you to buy one ticket because it's very popular, and somebody buys a ticket and they try to create a new wallet. And if you enforce the users to own a Quadrata passport, then when they onboard a second passport, they will be tied to the same DID. And then the DApp can detect that, again, it's the same person. So I think it is opt-in at its core, but the businesses have the logic to ensure certain uniqueness as well.
That makes a lot of sense. So, at this phase and looking at kind of what you are offering now, and based on the discussion we've so far, it seems like a lot of the existing real world identity information, whether it's government issued or other things, are really what you're summarizing and attribute and standardizing into this usable things. And as I've talked to other people about reputation on Web3, a lot of their discussion is about the reputation you build out on chain after you exist, either through the wallet and user. So reputation on Web3 may end up being more about what you've done, like a very famous trader or a MEV hacker or whatever it might be, or professional. Their reputation is not really about the real world identity. It could be a high school student in some part of the world, but more about what they've done. How do you see that on-chain reputation, that earned transaction history, affect your passport? Is it something that will feed back into this process a new attribute that's not based on this more, let's call it traditional KYC professionals bringing on board this messy, wetware, paper-based world into online? What happens to those on-chain, pure on-chain, native on-chain reputational events and data sets?
I am very excited about on-chain native reputation. I believe that this is really like the holy grail of what we're trying to achieve. I think it has always been for us like a longer term vision, and the reason why I'm very excited about these opportunities, and the reason why I'm thinking of it as a sequential approach is because it's very difficult to talk about reputation without identity, for the simple reason that reputation is as trusted as your cost of building and not rebooting your reputation. If today I can build my reputation, I'm gaming the algo and I get caught, and I can just start from scratch with the cost of spinning a new wallet, which costs us $0, and I can do that in half a second, then the reputation aspect is not as strong as that. Now, if you combine reputation with identity, and in our case, a non-rebootable identity because of a DID, then reputation has a real meaning because it is something that will follow you no matter how many wallets you create after that. So that's why we're taking a sequential approach to that, but we are already working on reputational data. So we have 2 projects coming in. One that is, I'm not going to talk too much about it, but there's an announcement coming in that's talk a bit more about on-chain reputation. And the second aspect that is also like how do we bridge off-chain reputation on-chain. So I think part of a roadmap already envision those things today. That is like how do we basically ensure that you have this identity, and there's beyond the fact that you've been KYC and the compliance check, actually are able to bring more and more reputational data that could be consumed. That's really where I think the interesting point is dApps and users will benefit tremendously from it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to use your term non-rebootable identity being the leaky bucket, right? Like if you can have a bucket and you can fill it with water and you can just like empty it and start it over, then that really doesn't hold water, somewhat metaphorically speaking. I think it's super important for people to know that a reputation is as easily built up, and God forbid, Web3 and cryptos thus far is a series of really fast reputational building games. And it's not really been kind of getting the benefit of real reputation, whether it's brand reputation or corporate reputation or even like real personal reputation in terms of the anonymous nature or the celebration of anon founders. I think, founders who use their real name and use their real history is already saying, hey, I have a non-rebootable identity. You should trust me just a little bit. It hasn't really happened in a bear market. I think that's a little bit more substantial than in the euphoria of like, who's going to give me the next thing, the next hit? It's a great word, non-rebootable identity being the foundation. I think it's great. In your sense, if you look at the growth of the Web3 kind of industry in terms of building on top of Wallet Connect and stuff like that, and starting to grapple with either because of regulational reasons for this type of like, compliance and sanction list type of stuff, and then kind of like business reasons in terms of like the operation of protocol for civil resistance. So those are the 2 problems we've talked about. Are there other problems that you think are preventing app developers to build the application they want that your solution, Quadrata solution, will allow them to kind of jump over another hoop? So, compliance and kind of like civil. Are there other things that you believe is a roadblock that you're helping to lift?
Absolutely. I mean, we just talked about this one, right? Like the reputational data. If you look at today DeFi, I think DeFi has been fantastic about proving the technology and being able to transact in a permissionless realm when you remove all intermediaries, and smart contract are making things a lot more efficient. But if you also look objectively at the state of DeFi, you'll see that most products in DeFi are what we can call like more like speculative DeFi. You can buy tokens, you can leverage lending, borrowing, and short and long-term tokens. So it's really used for again like trading aspect and leverage aspect of finance. Yeah. You don't have yet much financial services that I would say the day-to-day users are accustomed to. Take a loan to buy something, right, or something like that. And that is because it's missing inherently the notion of reputation. Like loans, obviously, everything that comes with loan is the risk of default. And risk of default, you need data point about a risk profile. So once we enable reputation, slowly over time, when those DeFi applications are able to get a better picture of their consumer, hopefully we'll be able to switch from over-collateralized to uncollateralized, and at some point to unsecured lending. That's really the goal. Otherwise, DeFi fails, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And it's really resonate, right? Because we've been working on a payment protocol that has basically mediate-based payment. So you have a little kind of escrow fund. And one of the things that happens after you have escrow, much like credit card company having a kind of overnight clearance or something like that, is so you can provide merchant cash advance. You can provide invoice discounting. Now, obviously, the actual mechanism of taking deductions and holding the funds are doable in terms of smart contracts and with some off-chain processing even do it. The hard part is it is beginning to be unsecured lending against not just the payment history, which you can get on chain, but also who is the person who's trying to sell their invoice. Are they the real person? Are they a rebooted identity that has a leaky bucket, right? Or is it really a person who has been in this business and will be in this business of selling, I don't know, NFT, subscription, membership, whatever it might be, that's on the other side of the revenue of the invoice. So as we are working out on our own invoice discounting, invoice factoring type of logic, we definitely see that, well, you can launch something like that. The rates would just be super high, right? Because the risk of non-payment is really high. And even if you're buying the actual cash flow, that cash flow will dry off the moment that person runs away. But if there's a little bit of like reputation or who that person is, and it's something that's hard to reboot, then suddenly the rates can go way down. And then the actual discounting mechanism becomes much more economically competitive to what is offered by Stripe or your credit card company or credit card merchant service company. So I totally resonate with that. And does that make sense? Like, is that the type of use case you're imagining?
That is the type of use cases. Some of them are, obviously it's a combination with other data points. Some of them, sometimes it's a combination with off-chain underwriters. Some of them, they want to consume that directly. Some of them, it's not necessarily just to give a loan. It's literally to be able to say, this is a real customers and they have a good reputation. So X, Y, and Z are offering those access. So I think you can think of reputations today. It's a data point that is used. We don't realize it, but it's used for everything that we do. You go on Yelp, you're going to look at reviews. You go on Amazon, you're going to look at reviews. Airbnb, same thing. So we not necessarily just think about the credit score and the financial reputations, but you think about just reputation as a general, and be able to again tie that to a non-rebuttable identity is the core business here. And at the same time, that's why it's exciting for us, because as soon as this is established, I mean, the sky is the limit in terms of kind of what type of information could be interesting to bring as part of your passports. And again, that is always to the benefit of the consumer, because they can accumulate their reputations to themselves and not the asset this time themselves. And it's the benefit to the applications because they have access finally to just data point that they do not have. I mean, they do not have today.
Yeah, and then I think the borrowing rate will, directly benefit from having more information, and then it becomes more competitive without the need for speculative inflation in terms of the yield and return being subsidized in an unsustainable way. That makes a lot of sense. What is your thoughts about, when we talk about reputation, we always think about, is reputation like reviews, where you have to read it and have an understanding and make a human judgment based on many words you see? Or is it a number, 389? Or in the FICO universe in the United States, 753. And that means something to people. Are you for or against, or more nuanced version of those, numerical reputation? Or are you for judgment call based on a set of attribute without a kind of convenient summarized number?
Yes, I would say this is really, I don't think I'm neutral. That's the short answer. I think the long answer is that the reason why I'm neutral is because different product and even consumer uses that differently. If you look at, for instance, FICO score, a lot of US lenders use FICO score, not the score they directly themselves. They actually use the raw data point, and then they consume that and they come up with their own score. Some of them might use the actual FICO score, depending on how you model your system and how accurately you want to become. One or the other is better. So I think I can see the same thing happening. I think today in Web3, unfortunately, we do have more like technological limitation of what we can make available on chain. So a score is a lot more smaller to post and to query. So that's something that probably is more wise to start with, and a score is better than nothing. But I can see this evolving as blockchain technology and the bottleneck of blockchain technology gets improved. Hopefully, we can get into more granular data and having the same granularity that we have in Web2. And at that point, it's always good to have both either way, because different businesses need different data points.
Yeah, we certainly have a problem of throughput on these changing data. You think about what these chain link price feed, someone has to pay a lot of gas updating the number of USD to ETH conversion every minute or so to keep the ecosystem going and provide security for people who are using this protocol. And if you're talking about, writing a FICO score equivalent for each user on DeFi continuously, even if it's a rollup, even if it is a CK based technology, it will still be expensive. So I think there is a huge role for a combination of on-chain protocol for providing key attribute and some off-chain protocol providing kind of near real-time data that can be correlated but not necessarily written on-chain, because it's not as important to consume it. And there are technology. We have some technology internally for our own use case that uses Merkle proofs as a way to validate off-chain kind of like data sets to just check that, hey, are you row number 665 on this off-chain IPFS store thing? Yes, then all you have to do is write a proof for a large data set on a per basis. We call that computational oracle. I think this idea of computational oracle combined with on-chain validated information that goes through that expense is nicely probably the combination necessary. But I agree with you that there's a huge range of needs in terms of numeric or qualitative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think we're seeing today, I think this design, this off-chain, a lot of data, on-chain, just verifiable proof. I think a lot of it's a great design. A lot of it is also just because of the bottlenecks of the technology. So I think we'll see how the technology evolves. And today, this design is probably the best we can find out there to be able to prove both sides. And that's kind of how we do it ultimately as well. Our data vendors contain the informations, and then what we post on chain are the verifiable proof of those verification or obfuscated summary of those verifications in a sense.
Yeah, it's the verified proof is on chain, and then the off chain is either the source, the computation, or even the availability of the actual retrieval. I can imagine someone never retrieving the DID off chain and just be okay with whatever bits on chain. Some people say, no, I gotta see the DID. The off-chain document, the profile document. I've been following the work of the Decentralized Identity Foundation, DIF, quite a while, and I was once a member of the advisory council of the World Wide Web Consortium when Manuel Smalley was doing the work on verifiable credential, VC. So I'm quite familiar with this area, and I'm really, really glad to see the intersection between Web3 and that work, which was, by the way, not a blockchain thing when that first came out of that. Yeah.
That's fascinating, and it always felt like the idea perfect for has been built for Web3, but you're right that that's something that verifiable credentials and those things or those norms were created even before us. So it's good to see that being applicable for this technology that is much better. And again, what's exciting about this, it's a brand new technology, so we have the chance to kind of build it in a different way. In shifting, redefining how this notion of identity is, and everyone can agree. I think I haven't met a single person that disagree that digital identity in Web2 is it's just not efficient, and everyone hates how you have to onboard and KYC every single time. So it does feel like something we should solve and do it correctly this time.
Yeah, it's the kind of litmus test or the canary coal mine is when Oculus said, you got to log in using your Facebook ID to join a metaverse. It just feels so wrong to so many people. Then you realize that the number one identity or number two or three identity providers in the Web2 world failed themselves in integrating with full control of Zuckerberg's empire to really get people comfortable with this one company controlling everything about your identity. And especially with metaverse being kind of bigger than that. And I think Web3 is bigger than Metaverse, right? Metaverse is just one company's vision of one game engine, and Web3 is this fabric that ties together these various experiments around protocol and coordination. So I think it's really, really cool that you're bringing this really clean primitive that can be built upon. What's your sense as you talk to developers about kind of the chicken and egg problem? I need the users to be able to get my protocol to work, but I need the users to not be draining my wallet by way of simple attack to make that happen. And when do they engage with you guys, and how do you make it so that this doesn't become like, it's so much compliance and so much thing, and you end up having 3 users and that doesn't really do anything? How do you deal with the issues of needing to gain scales to make a protocol work, and also making sure that that scale occur with some sort of safeguard so it doesn't get collapse on some of the negative aspects of not having identity reputation? How do you deal with that when you talk to developer, considering the use of your protocol or the reputation identity problem?
Yeah, I think the important part for us is that we are ultimately bringing information on chain. So our technology has been built so that the applications can actually pick and choose which attributes they want their users to have. And if they don't have it, they can onboard with a minimum amount of collecting information to make sure that they have access to those data points. So we are not necessarily saying that everyone who owns a passport have to do full checks and full compliance. You can technically onboard with just one attribute that doesn't even require you to KYC. So we have that flexibility here.
I see.
And I think, I'm convincing those dApps. I think it's been interesting a few months for me because, again, the chicken and egg problem that we thought we were going to face actually were not, because a lot of those companies, if they want to innovate, it's either they're already facing existing problems, like for instance, Sybil attacks, and they have no other way, and they think that their consumer would actually feel a lot better if the system wasn't gamed at the cost of KYC. I think one good example is Sandbox. Sandbox released their alpha season 3, and they require their users to KYC to claim their rewards. One of the reasons likely behind those reasoning is that they likely had a lot of bots gaming those rewards, and it comes at the cost of real consumer, real users experience. And when I look at kind of the comments and the feedbacks, nobody seems to complain about KYC. Everyone understands that it's making the game better. It's removing those bots from the experience.
Yes.
So there's benefit here. I think that's where like the dApps, if you provide a technology, even if you don't have yet those passports or a lot of passports, and even if they know that their consumer would have to onboard, sometimes the trade-off is still beneficial. And that's the type of companies that we are working with today. And it will get easier and easier over time, because the more of those applications, the more of those passports, and therefore the overlapping of consumer between apps, likelihood of them not having to re-onboard because they already onboarded once is going to be a high probability at some point.
Yeah, it's fascinating that the user themselves is enjoying this roadblock or this road bump that they have to go through. It's almost like, if everybody has a bracelet, then only the people who are part of our party would get the free drinks or whatever, get the free carnival ticket. It's a way of making sure that the real people, the real participant, the people who've actually are, flesh and blood and doing something benefiting, there's like, yeah, of course, get the scalpers out, get the people who are not real away. And that's a really interesting thing. So they will wait in line and they will get scanned and whatever it might be. So that's interesting that it's not really like blocking that consumer adoption, because they feel participating in this communal experience and they want to make sure that everybody's like them. That's fascinating.
I think it's not just
it makes a lot of sense.
Everyone who onboarded, everyone who holds crypto had inherently KYC at some point. They have KYC with an exchange. They have KYC with Coinbase or Binance. So it's not like nobody's familiar with the process of KYC. I think it's more like, again, there is a mind shift that in DeFi, in Web3, that there's no need for KYC. So I think I can see the resistance a little bit from the existing consumer, but we have to believe that, again, the goal is that are we going to try to create product for a minority of people who are in Web3 today? Are we trying to build real product with better incentives and with ratings and better capital efficient, lower rates that attracts the mass, right? I think that's really where we have to think about, again, pleasing one or the other. And I believe that even the existing set of customers that are in Web3 today, if you give them better experience, lower rates, better capital efficient, some access to product that they don't have, they will do it. If they have to do it once, I'm sure they'll be happy to.
Yeah, and I think part of the communication challenge and part of the educational challenge, not just in terms of talking about it on a show like this, but also making it evident to someone who's new to Web3 that behind MetaMask, behind these different URL you have to go, is this thoughtfulness and this thinking. So I think there's a lot to be done in terms of signage and that kind of like understanding what's going on. But there's no doubt in my mind as a builder that the infrastructure necessary to do it is coming on board every single day. And it's just fascinating to hear you kind of break down in many ways. I hope my questions were useful. I'm asking question I'm interested in the answer to, right? So I actually want to know what you think of it, because it helps me understand, not only as a person who is enthusiastic about the migration from Web 2 to Web 3 and who's going to come along and how we're going to build a better version of the web that's actually more in line with the World Wide Web 1.0 vision from Tim Berners-Lee, but also a way to make sure that as a builder that I'm understanding what are the opportunities to integrate the tools and protocols that have thought through these problems, but is willing to, unlike in Web 2, sometimes share that kind of primitive, those data and the APIs, because we share this amazing new global state and execution engine for this to integrate without necessarily having a lot of lawyers involved. It's great.
Yeah,
do you have anything that you want to cover in the remaining time we have?
I was going to say, most of your questions, I really appreciate them. They're obviously forced kind of thinking, and that's the type of questions that we have asked ourselves. And again, it's not something that just we're able to come up with a month. I think it's the type of questions that we think about because we talk with industry expert like you guys and people. I've had a chance in my job a day-to-day basis to really talk with DeFi protocols, people who are innovating, people who are building the product of tomorrow. And there's a lot of smart people in here, and there's a lot of smart feedback and smart comments. So I think every conversation like this is a way for me to kind of expand on my thoughts, but it's a way for me to absorb also like the market feedback, because at the end of the day, it is something new. Blockchain as a whole is new. Digital identity is even newer. And nobody has yet defined that this is what's going to happen, but we are trying to build what's there to come.
That makes a lot of sense. So are there other things you want to cover today in terms of like maybe new things for the community to look out for, the new announcement you're coming in, to give us maybe either a sneak preview or just a stay tuned type of notice?
Yeah, I think there's definitely interesting announcement that I'm not able to mention right now. So definitely follow us, on Twitter, Discord, exciting announcement coming up. I would say in terms of known roadmap, what we are focusing on is really deploying our technology to other blockchains. Clearly there's demands there on our technology for other chains. Identity is not segregated as a single chain. We are blockchain agnostic.
Sure not.
And the second aspect is, we are always working and eager to bring more and more data points that are useful to Web3 companies. So to the extent that there's a specific interest, feel free to reach out to us. But we do have already today, our technology live out there on Ethereum, on Polygon. It is being tested, audited, and integrated by some companies. So if you have even remotely a need for what we discussed today, happy to chat and discuss and brainstorm.
It's lovely. I think this multi-chain future to have people not only be able to participate for different types of cost or where the protocol, social media protocol may be on one chain, a type of a derivative may be on another chain. It could be app chain. It could be a more general purpose chain. It'd be good if the identities are not split in 10 different ways. It's possible to have the same address in different chains. It's also possible to have different address on different chain for the same person. So I'm sure that is a plenty to talk about in another day about the multi-chain identity problem. But I do believe that I think we have a lot of sandbox to play in, no pun intended, that developers are really experimenting with different price performance trust assumptions to find the best state sharing machine for their work. And I hope that we'll see you guys there in all the places, making sense of who that person is in wherever we boot up a new wallet.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We hope that as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Fabrice, for your time today. And then, as always, we thank the community for time and attention as we explore the fundamental building blocks of Web3 and as well as the use cases that these building blocks would make sense. We do a premiere every 2 weeks on Wednesday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And until next time, take care. Thank you, Fabrice.
Bye. Thank you so much. you.